is a live stream, our very first one ever for New Normal Consulting. My name is Kristen Carpenter Ogden, and I am the host today. I'm going to help facilitate what I'm hoping will be a productive conversation. I'm going to go ahead and just give away the name of your blog post, Jeff, and then we'll get into some introductions. We're here today to talk about Jeff O'Keefe's blog post titled "Of Jobs, Trade, and Fairy Tale, a discussion on reshoring." And again, shared on the New Normal Consulting website last week, and it got a lot of shares and stirred up a lot of commentary. And ultimately, Jeff has been, watching the presidential campaigns unfold, and I think that he got pretty fired up about all of the outlandish claims and unfounded accusations, and everything that's going on around the candidates making reference to U.S. jobs leaving and being stolen by China and Vietnam and Mexico and others. So Jeff, could you please introduce yourself and maybe give us a little bit more context, and then we'll go ahead and introduce the other people on the panel today.
I'd love to. I'm Jeff O'Keefe. This is my 40th year in the outdoor industry. I don't know if I should say that proudly or quietly, at any rate. And I've been in a lot of roles. The last 8 years, I was in a supply chain sourcing role with a larger group of companies in the outdoor industry. And Kristen said it correctly. By the way, that blog post is at www.newnormalconsulting.com. Take a look at it if you haven't seen it. And listening, and she said it correctly, listening to candidates overtly blaming other countries for quote unquote stealing jobs always rankled a bit because I know, because I've done it, I know how jobs go from the United States to Vietnam, or from the United States to China or Bangladesh or Sri Lanka or wherever they go. They move because there's pressure on ultimately retail prices. As American consumers, we value everyday low prices, and even with premium goods like higher end outdoor products, which is the space that I've worked in for all these years. There has always been price pressure, but nothing like the last 10 or 15 years, it seems to me. So CEOs, supply chain executives, product managers, sourcing people are constantly, and this isn't just in our industry, it's in every industry, constantly under pressure to address cost, and as a primary influence on the ultimate retail. So nobody's holding a gun to a sourcing person's head saying, come with me and bring your jobs with you, and you'll get one phone call once you get to Shanghai. So that's a myth. The people, if there's responsibility for jobs moving, it really is the business managers. And then the other notion is that if you elect me, I will bring them back. And for two reasons, maybe more, but two that come immediately to mind. I think that falls into the fairy tale realm as well. The President of the United States or the Senator of Colorado doesn't have the ability necessarily to directly go to one of our outdoor companies and demand that they bring the jobs back. So you have to wonder, if they're serious about that they're going to do that, the politicians that is, then what would be the mechanics? And I won't go into all of the math around this right now, but other than to say that the disparity in the labor portion of it is so great between some of these, particularly the Asian venues for manufacturing and even minimum wage environments in the United States, that even extremely punitive duties would not offset that. So, if the politician is talking about, let's put up 150% duties on all imported goods from China, let's say, to punish them, it would have to be absurd before it really started to balance out, and the geopolitical ramifications of that would be extreme.
And today we are here to talk about a couple of focus points around that. It's obviously a very, very big conversation, but I'd like to introduce the other panelists. Brad Lawrence is also with New Normal Consulting. Welcome, Brad.
Thank you. Thanks for arranging this. Appreciate it. Yeah, it's just an interesting topic. I mean, you know, my take on this is more from the sales side. You know, with supply chain and having been in a lot of factories over the years. This is my 31st year in the outdoor industry, and you know, in the early days of, say, Gregory, for instance, the factory was right there in Temecula, and you know, I watched that transition to Mexico and then ultimately China and who knows where now, but. You know, it was a long transition, and it happened over a long period of time. And I think, you know, I have to agree with Jeff that any politician who says that we can just resource it, or you know, reshore it rather, you know, within an election cycle, you know, it doesn't understand how the process happened in the first place. But in any event, yeah, thanks for having this today, Kristen. Appreciate it.
Yeah, happy to have it. And Daniel Uretsky is the president of Allied Feather and Down. Thank you for joining us, Daniel.
Sure. Thank you for having me as well.
And Daniel has a very, very awesome position, and it's so great that he is here with us today because he represents both supplier and manufacturer. Can you give us a little bit of a profile on that for our audience, and then we'll dive into some Q&A?
Sure. So we are a raw material supplier to the outdoor and apparel industry. We supply down for jackets, sleeping bags, things like that. And then we also manufacture bedding. So we make pillows, comforters, things like that, sleep products. And we manufacture both here in the US and in China. So I think it was a very interesting article that Jeff wrote, and reshoring, moving more products overseas, bringing them back here. It's a conversation that we're constantly having internally here. What can be done here, what can't, what makes sense to be done here, what doesn't, and just always trying to balance that. So I think it's definitely a very interesting discussion to have, and we're always looking for good perspectives on it.
So Daniel, you shared in our pre-call to this lab that you have been having a lot of conversations around this topic. Obviously, that's heightened because of the politics right now in the United States, correct?
Yeah, I think that, you know, you'll see or hear rather from certain retailers or whatever it is that they want something to be made in the USA, or they want a made in the USA label. You know, and sometimes that's true. Sometimes it's just a matter of seeing what the price looks like before that kind of gets discounted. But yeah, I think in election years, it probably comes up more and more. In this business, I think producing things overseas is a fact of life at this point, obviously. So I don't even think there's a negative, any kind of negative stigma to it anymore. I think it's just a function of what makes the most sense for that particular product.
And just also, you know, obviously we have the political backdrop, but we also have the margin, obviously, with the changes we're seeing in wholesale. And you play such an interesting pivotal role in that product go to market and roll out planning discussion with your clients. So I think that's another, you know, great vantage point that you bring to this conversation today. So thank you again.
Sure, thank you.
Jeff, do you want to maybe talk a little bit about one of the key points I think that was, you know, right out of the gate pointed out in your post, which obviously is the fact that there is an aspiration for reshoring, and then there's the reality, which we just started to talk about with Daniel. Can you maybe talk about, for our audience today, like what the most relevant components of that is? I think from a transparency standpoint would be good, and just anything else that you're seeing, like a real world view on.
Well, yeah, I would, and rein me in if I get off topic here a little bit. But you know, I think, you know, for the health of our, you know, American economy, and for our communities, and for, you know, for our friends and neighbors and the rest of the citizenry, we, you know, I would love to see, you know, full employment. I'd love to see, you know, good paying jobs, you know, back in the United States, or new types of jobs that are able to address some of the challenges that so many communities are facing. And I don't want to sound like a politician here myself, but you know, there are areas of the country that have really been impacted by jobs leaving, and we see those on the news every day. But you know, there are activities going on, and Brad mentioned a few earlier. Maybe he could remind us of those. But there are companies that are making products in the United States. There are small outdoor companies in Colorado and elsewhere that are doing a good job, and there are even larger companies that have done and are currently doing projects to bring some of that manufacturing here. And from the environmental standpoint, there obviously are benefits to that, carbon footprint wise. But I think I know the new normal posture on this is definitely to applaud all of that and support all of that. We have and have had clients who are domestic manufacturers. But my feeling really is that for us as a citizenry to really be engaged politically and to support the kind of dialogue and conversation and solutions that will really help, we need to be clear about what we're talking about. I keep using this vest as an example. Some parts of making this are somewhat automated. The patterns, the markers, and so forth to cut the various pieces of material for the 5 or 6 sizes that this vest is made in are computerized. So there is some automation there, and there are more automated forms of cutting those materials. But at the end of the day, I think, as I probably even used that expression, at the end of the day, a lot of human beings sit down at sewing machines and stitch this vest together. And I think my focus really was more of those assembly kind of jobs, the textile, the apparel jobs, tents, sleeping bags, backpacks, as it relates to our industry. Those are the ones that are going to be more challenging to see them coming back. I'd hate to say that it's impossible or that it would never happen. I just don't see, I guess financially you'd say, or mathematically, how that equation is going to foot out, so that as Daniel and I were talking earlier, we have a sewing plant outside of Los Angeles, and trying to hire 10,000 people to sit and sew down vests is a bit of a stretch. I don't know if that answered your question or if I wandered. No,
it definitely provided some great context. So Daniel, would you mind commenting in terms of your viewpoint on bringing the jobs back and how that is the reality of it? I think that really the purpose of our conversation here today is to kind of ground the political conversation that's the 30,000 foot umbrella over the industry right now with the reality of it, because honestly, like, what the politicians are saying is actually setting expectations and putting targets on backs around people in our markets. And I think that could affect the brand, the emotional connection consumers have with brands. So I think, just adding some real dialogue here around, like, here is exactly why this is the way it is, and this is what we're trying to do. And, that would be great. And since you have a facility right there, and also one in China, and as you said, a forthcoming one in Asia, like, maybe we can talk a little bit about the concept of reshoring and bringing the jobs back and the challenges there specifically.
Yeah, I mean, I think Jeff pretty much spelled it out pretty well in his article. The biggest challenge would be price. I think that we've trained, I think that the market has trained the consumers to expect things at a certain price, and whether or not that's realistic, or whether or not that's a way that we should be thinking, is I think a larger discussion, right? I think that whether or not people should be buying 1 million t-shirts at $5 a piece, and as opposed to the 3 that they'll need at $20 a piece, or whatever the case may be. I think that the way the consumer's been trained is to expect those low price goods and to buy a lot more than they need. I think that there would have to be a complete shift in the way that consumers thought and acted, really, in order to bring jobs back. And that's, I think, the biggest challenge. I in terms of bringing it back, like Jeff said, or like we discussed before, you'd have to find the labor, train people again. All that over time can be done the same way that it was, that we had those we had those types of factories here, 50, 60, 70 years ago, and they all operated successfully and supplied the country with everything that it needed. I think that going back to that place is possible. It's just a function of, again, price. And while I hate to keep coming back to that and sounding like, that's all that matters. I mean, we're in business, right? And so you can make whatever you want here, but if nobody's going to buy it because they can go down the street and buy a similar or the same product for a fraction of the cost, unfortunately, consumers today are going to do that, whether they need the goods or not, or regardless of that type of consideration. And so, from that perspective, I think it's very hard for a politician to say we're going to bring more jobs back here, because first of all, do people here want the jobs that are possible to be brought back? And if people don't want those jobs, then who's going to take them? I think it's and how are you going to make the goods at those prices? And it's just, I don't know. It's a tough conversation, and it's a long conversation, honestly.
If I could just interject, I mean, I think it's interesting, that maybe cost or price isn't the overall driver, because if you look at the manufacturing that's done here in the U.S. right now, a lot of it is high-end goods. I mean, I live here in Madison, and just a few miles away, Trek makes their most expensive bikes and all of their custom bikes there. My good friend Chris Fortune owns Ceres rack company for bikes, and he is just a few miles south of me here. And they have the Ceres brand, but they also have Cyclops, which are really high-end, spinning bikes, and then also PowerTap, which was the original power measurement system for bicycles. So, these are very high-end products, and he fully employs, dozens and dozens and dozens of people in his factory. But, in our own industry, we also have Voorhees, which has come out of Colorado, making high-end wool goods, waterproof wool, interestingly. In other brands as diverse as Timbuktu, New Balance, Red Wing shoes. There's a list. So I think that we need to be careful that we're not necessarily alienating all types of, not alienating, but that we're looking at the total picture of what's being done here too. That was my only concern about Jeff's article originally, was the depth and breadth of what we do manufacture in this country, which is pretty amazing. I think
it's still considerable. Yeah.
And I think that's 100% right. I mean, we as well make a lot of things here on the bedding side of our company, where we manufacture pillows, and we're starting to make more and more comforters and things like that. And you're right, it does tend to be higher end goods. It does tend to be things where you have a little bit more room on. But even with that, we still see challenges, and components are still made overseas, right? So it's maybe the discussion goes from, can we make everything here and we shouldn't be bringing anything here, to what can we make here in the most efficient way, while still making some components overseas, but maybe finishing them here, which would bring some jobs back and alleviate some of that. So maybe kind of a good middle ground is trying to incentivize that aspect of it, and seeing what we could make overseas and then bring here to finish.
And there are some good examples of that. I'm familiar with the company, a U.S. company that makes sleeping bags, more the opening price point, family camping style rectangular sleeping bags, and the shells are sewn in China, shipped here, which is very economical because it's a very, very lightweight piece of fabric. So I don't know how many can go in a container, but it's tens of thousands, I'm sure. And then the batting is sewn, the insulation is sewn together with the shell domestically. Now this is it's a highly automated function, and that's the way that they've been able to make that work. But the combination of those two things, the Chinese shell production and then the final assembly here and closing the bag up, makes it so that they are a prime supplier to the biggest mass discount retailer in the country. A couple of other thoughts. The other thing we've got going on kind of in the political landscape right now is the push towards a higher minimum wage, which I'll just, be frank and say I definitely support it, and whether it's Hillary Clinton at $12 an hour or somebody else at 15, and it's already happening in certain states. Daniel, it's happened in your state. Jerry Brown just signed $15 an hour minimum wage. It'll take a few years to phase in.
Well, in LA, in the city of LA, it's already there.
In LA, it's already there, and I think San Francisco probably as well, and I think Seattle and Cuomo just signed this for New York as well. So again, back to the mathematics of the whole thing, we have kind of competing, and Daniel, you said this really well. We have competing desires, competing needs, if you will. One is I want that product, but I want it cheaply, and I want myself and my cohorts, my kids, my friends, to have the benefit of a minimum wage that will keep me from the welfare rolls. So those things, there's a bit of a clash of needs or intentions there. And I don't know what to do about that, to tell you the truth. It'll make a solution to this somewhat more challenging. But maybe if I could hinge into another thought, then I'll yield the floor to my esteemed colleagues. One thing that gives me some hope about this, and again, Daniel, you sort of tickled this thought when you were talking about us as consumers for a lot of people, our number one selection criteria is price. For a lot of people, maybe our only selection criteria is price. But in a number of product categories, whether it's artisanal food or certain outdoor products or the 1% movement or the B Corp movement, we've got companies that are speaking more comprehensively about real cost. You know, and this isn't a concept that we talk about a lot. I'm by no means the first one to ever bring this up. You know, Yvon Chouinard has been talking about this for a long time, as have others. But, you know, the real cost of, again, let's go back to this product. You know, where did everything come from? What did it take to make it? How long will it last? What do we do with it when it's done? How long is it going to take to decompose? And the environmental, the social, the economic costs, all those things. I won't say that I don't see a mass movement in the United States to think that way, but there is a movement to think that way in the United States, even small as it might be, and that gives me some hope. You know, that maybe you know, at some point we will get more comfortable understanding quality and implications or costs about the things that we consume that are something other than it was $89.
Yeah,
Let me ask
sorry,
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I think that's 100% correct, and I think that the average person, or I guess I can speak for myself at least, you know, kind of looks at different products different ways, right? So you'll have your, let's say your best down jacket that you want to have certain technical features, and you want it to do certain things, and you're going to invest a certain amount of money in that, and that's something that you're going to make a careful kind of decision about. And then, you know, for a product like that you're doing that, sure, then you know, things like made in the USA or how they're made and where they're made, all of those things will be taken into consideration. But I think the average consumer also then has, you know, their $50, $60, $70 Uniqlo down vest that they just want to be able to wear in 3 different colors, depending on what the rest of their outfit looks like, that they're going to toss after a year or two. And so maybe what needs to happen is that kind of consumerism, that really unnecessary, you know, just buying things for the sake of having them is what shifts a little bit. You know, just not exactly on this topic, but something I always think about that kind of has a similar theme here is the way that we, you know, in our business, we're in the winter business, right? We sell down for jackets and things. And the way that cycle works is products hit the stores August, September, when it's still pretty warm outside. No one's looking to buy, you know, heavy overcoats at that time. And by the time it actually does start getting cold after Thanksgiving and Christmas, everything is marked down on sale, and then nobody is selling things for the prices they want. I think that's just a way that we've trained consumers to think, and it doesn't really necessarily, so consumers know that they're going to go on sale after that point, and they can wait till then because it's not cold until then. I think it's just a shift in retail, really. I think is what we're looking at, as opposed to manufacturing specifically.
So do you mean the buy cycle specifically, the actual product to the store, the whole way?
Well, that's definitely a part of it, right? I think that the way the lead times and things like that, yeah, if that became more important, then certainly manufacturing here in the United States would be a more attractive solution, right? Because that would be a way to get things to retail from demand to being in store a lot quicker. But yeah, that would definitely be a part of it. But also just in general, I mean, the way that consumers think about how things are put on the shelves and when they're going to go on sale and when they actually need to buy them versus, when it would be cool to have it, all those different things would play a huge role.
Well, go ahead, Brad.
I just think you bring up a host of good points, Daniel, because, and circling back also to what Jeff said, it brings up the whole question. There's two things I wanted to point out. First is, Jeff brings up the question about how sustainable the current model is. And, it was couched in the idea of environmental sustainability, but there's going to be an economies of scale for business with labor costs rising in Asia. And Jeff certainly mentioned this in his article. And then also just the shipping costs. At a certain point, can we afford to ship raw materials from the U.S. to China to be stitched together, back to the U.S. to be finished? Does that work long term with sustainability? That's the one question I'd like to ask. The other question, Daniel, too, for you specifically was, the whole thing about the supply chain. With seasonality and margin built into it, can we get to a point with just-in-time inventory, if we're making things closer to home, that goods are always on full price? Can we make just enough to scale up to demand, or are we going to be committed forever making them 18, 24 months ahead of time and then gambling that there's going to be a good winter 18 to 24 months from now? It seems like if we could bring it back closer, and if it looks like we're not going to need that many jackets for the season, if manufacturers could scale back, they could just sell out, just make so few that they don't sell them all.
I think it's a great question. And I think that the answer honestly is, if you are making it just in time so that everything's at full price, at that point, how many do you actually need? Meaning, how many things are being sold today just because they're discounted so heavily, and people are in the store and they're like, oh, wow, great deal. I don't need it, but I'll just buy it because why not? Versus if everything was at full price because you were doing things just in time, how many would you actually need at that point? And then based on how many you actually need, because how many are consumers willing to pay for at that full retail price, can you make that amount? And I think that ultimately we'd be able to. I think it's that this whole notion of, we're going to mark things down so little, and maybe the actual retail price should be closer to what the sale price is, or though again, we're not in retail, so that's really not a question for us, but those are all things that I think would need to be answered, right? I think that what is the correct price, I guess, that the consumer should be paying, or what's the true, getting to what Jeff said, the true cost of things, right? So not only in manufacturing it, but also in purchasing them, what's kind of that sweet spot, and then based on that, what are the demands then?
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say one quick thing. So remember what you were going to say, Jeff. But Daniel, you just mentioned, that's really up to retail. Actually, in this era, I feel like we have more of an opportunity to actually be transparent and engage the consumer directly, where our retailers will benefit from that on this type of story, whether it's maker or small batch manufacturing, et cetera. It seems like a lot of the clients that Verde serves are looking at small batch. They're looking at multiple product drops a year. And I think that, we're here to talk to the specialty market through New Normal Consulting. They're in a position to sell a high-end and a branded experience through their storefronts, whether it's physical or online. So I believe that Made in the USA almost becomes an ingredient brand, the same way Gore-Tex and Allied Feather are ingredient brands to those products. So, I can't help but approach this from the brand and PR side, so forgive me, but it feels to me like there's a great opportunity going direct to the consumer to basically share with them kind of the transparency and why things cost the way they do. And then here's a premium product and this is where you can buy it and here's why it's premium. The storytelling could be more detailed.
Yeah.
Well,
I think in the PR world and in Brad and my business and the brands, to be sure, they can carry this torch of what is real cost. Having been on the product side for so long, and Daniel knows this, we use elaborate spreadsheets to build up from raw materials through labor, through duty and freight and various other factors that get added on, and then you go to a wholesale price, and then you go to a retail price, and there's a numeric relationship between that first cost and that final retail that's relatively static, but it doesn't take into account the other things that we're talking about. It doesn't take into account the 100-year picture in terms of carbon footprint or environmental impact, and it doesn't take into account the social costs or the employment costs. And I got to be careful when I say stuff like this because in one of the debates I heard somebody scolded about this isn't Denmark, and I realize the United States is not Denmark. However, I will say it does seem to me, and everybody here spent more than a little bit of time in Europe, it does seem to me that European consumers have a bit higher sensitivity to some of the softer or intangible costs around product. Now, I don't want to make a sweeping generalization because we'll have all kinds of notes posted on the blab here about this. But generally, I've seen this a lot where attention to where people's food is coming from, Switzerland and France in particular, and Italy is this way a lot, and sort of a resistance to big chain, especially big American chain retail. So I think it's possible, but it is, somebody who's attending this session right here asked the question, how do you change the consumer mindset so that products made in the U.S. have the value needed to allow companies to manufacture successfully here? And I think this is part of it, having people really understand that I used to be able to get that thing for $49 and now it's $85.50, but that's because I'm supporting it being made in the United States. It's traveling 10,000 miles less than it used to. People in my community have a job. And it's kind of going from, we're asking consumers to go from a solitary sort of me-oriented view of their consumption to a larger we-oriented.
Yeah, I think you're 100% right. I think you're 100% right. I think that's where we headed. I just think that at that point, the question would become, what do I really need it at $85.50 versus when I used to be able to buy it at $49, and how much less would we be selling at $85.50? So I agree with you. I think you could get a lot of consumers to understand why it should cost $85.50 versus the $49, and why it's preferable to have it in the store at $85.50 than at $49 that they used to pay. But then the question for them is going to become, okay, now that it's $85.50, I get why it is and why it should be, but do I really need it now?
Right.
I think we have an analog and maybe a way to train consumers, and I think they're already trained. If you look at the high-end kids clothing market in terms of outerwear, I mean, as a parent, I'm totally conditioned. If my kids need a new jacket, I have to get it by the end of August, September, because if I wait till October and it's a cold winter, it's gone. And, we don't get it on sale that often. We don't get it at lower price. It's a low margin item to begin with, and people don't want to, have a high inventory of it. So they're looking to be sold out by Christmas. And I think, across this northern tier where it gets cold here in Madison, Wisconsin, people just know if they don't get their bibs by a certain point, they're not going to get them, and they're going to pay full price almost every time. So if you think about that as, maybe adult outerwear, if you don't get your jacket or your vest by a certain point, they're going to be showing flip-flops for spring break, but they're not going to be selling the big down jackets anymore. So it might be a way to get the consumers to do that. I mean, to answer that one question, but maybe I'm just spitballing there.
No, I think that's good. Yeah.
It's a fair point.
There was, and I should have looked this up before we got on, and maybe we can post it afterwards for people who are watching, and maybe one of you heard this. Thursday or Friday of last week, just before Snowpocalypse 2.0 hit Colorado and I could still drive around, NPR had an interview with a fellow who's written a couple of books about the impact of products environmentally, and I need to look this up to get the name of the book and the fellow's name. But it was fascinating because he and if somebody's listening and you know who this author is, I'd love to share it because it was really good. He was talking about the cup of coffee that he was making in his kitchen, and he literally traced back every single input or influence or cost, primarily in terms of mileage, that went into actually getting that coffee and the packaging and the coffee maker and the water and everything else to his kitchen, and it was into the tens of thousands of miles, if not more than that. It was really a fascinating study, and there is this part of it as well that's not expressed in the retail price of the $85 or the $49 jacket. Daniel, you know this. 20, 30 years ago, again, so many of these our type of products were made here. Whether, as Brad said, it was the Gregory backpacks in Temecula or Moonstone sleeping bags in Arcata or whatever.
I work for Moonstone too, by the way.
You work for everybody.
Yeah.
The production moved, and at some point, trailing, the production of the raw materials moved. So now, and I'm not an expert on where all the mills are, but I know that so much of the milling of fabrics, for instance, and Daniel, of course, with down too, has gone to Japan, Korea, or now China around Suzhou. And so bringing this back, we still have the issue of some of those more premium fabrics, let's say, that come from Japan. If we're going to make those items in LA, we've still got to ship that. We still have to ship that fabric back over here, as in order to do that, until U.S. mills get back up to speed. So there's a bit of a delay with all of this. It doesn't happen instantaneously. Again, going back to the original political premise of the whole thing, is that day one when I'm elected, I'm gonna punish those guys and bring those jobs back. It's that falls into the fairy tale realm.
Yeah, that notion I think is just more bluff than anything.
Yeah.
There is an interesting thing. I mean, Kristen touched on it earlier too with a small batch. I brought it up earlier with customization, specifically in regard to Trek, but Timbuk2 has, customization. I just got an email from Wald Caps, the classic bike cap company, that you can now make a custom bike cap. I'm assuming that they're done here locally because you can get them, super quick. But, it brings up the whole idea, and you bring up raw goods, but, Kristen had mentioned maker spaces too. I mean, couldn't, each major space, whether it's Los Angeles, Chicago, New York, some hubs, couldn't maker spaces do some of that? If, like, for instance, a brand created the design criteria, in a shared format, and then people wanted to customize it on color or size or tweak it a little bit, that it could be made for them locally with a makerspace. So that might be the future of retail, in my opinion, is that people get fitted up and suited up for the right custom goods that might be made close to home, actually, at the end of the day, or at the end of the era, let's say.
Brad, for everybody listening, can you define makerspace? You used that reference a couple of times.
Well, a makerspace, and I think they're still developing the standards for it, but they'll have 3D printers, they'll have sewing machines, they'll have laser-driven cutters, they'll have just a common array of tools. And right now, it's more of an educational tool, but I think it has some real business elements. And by educational tool, I mean they have one in New York and in the Bronx where people can make not only hip hop records, but maybe press the record and make the box. And it's the whole process of how to do that. But if it were set up from a commercial standpoint, I'm sure they would come up with all the basic tools that they would have in a factory, but just have one of each, for instance, and then they could download basically the specs on an item and have it constructed. And so, one of our viewers here, Mark Profit, says makerspace equals a place for people to make things. But I know they're working on standards for these. And again, it could have a profound commercial application. It's automated, but there'd certainly be economy to it.
There's also the Makers Movement, which is, there's several books on it that we can post on New Normal in a follow-up blog. But essentially, it's just, people, there's a certain consumer segment, and this is key, I think, that is attracted to buying things that are made here. And as you said, around the food in Denmark, I think we have the same movement going on here. It's a certain consumer profile that's after that. So when we talk about changing the consumer mindset, it really has to start with your brand's target audience. And, how important is this to them? And I think making decisions based around what they're going to value and give your brand permission to do is really the way to start it. We're talking very broad strokes here, which is exactly the way we can be talking. It's the only way we can talk around the way manufacturing, sourcing, and supply has been set up and is operating today in our markets. But it does seem like there are certain millennial consumers, for example. A lot of our brands are looking to engage that younger demographic that are actually very, very interested in collaboration projects and makers type of movements, if you will. And obviously we've got some legacy players like the Hand-Built Bicycle Show. There are several companies that have always tried to keep their mill space alive, such as Defeat. And, we have some clients that have factories here. Keen puts together boots in Portland in a factory on Swan Island. Confluence is doing 98% of their production in South Carolina. That's all of the whitewater and paddling. So like you guys said, there's some great successes out there. And I just think that you can actually make something like this work for your business by wondering what works for your target consumer. And obviously, again, we're all about supporting specialty at New Normal Consulting. And I believe that story will resonate with them because people are going into those stores and they want to belong to those stores because they want to be part of like something special. And I think that's really what the Made in America could be. And it's not necessarily like, I think, Jeff, what really kind of tilted you on this whole conversation and got you to write the post is the fact that politicians are using this as a way to kind of build favor when they actually don't have any idea what it really means to make this happen. And we happen to sell like an industry full of technical products, be it accessories, apparel, Peter. So I think that might be what really pushed your button.
Yeah, to a large extent. I mean, the term in the title, fairy tales, was meant to be a little bit of a poke, if not a big poke, because it is a serious, it is a serious issue. And unemployment in the United States is a problem, and underemployment is a problem. And I sincerely would like to see us address it, but it's like it's like a 12-step program almost until you actually accept what the facts are around the problem. It's really difficult to have a mature dialogue, and it's certainly not happening out in the public square this crazy season. A mature dialogue about what to do, and we need new ideas, and I think we're plenty smart to figure this out. I was prompted to just throw in something else, and I apologize if it's a bit of a non sequitur topically, but we were talking earlier about how do we re-educate ourselves as consumers, and full disclosure, we are not sales agents for the B Corp movement. We are actually at New Normal. We are going through the certification process, and we're almost there. We're about to become a benefit corp. But the B Corp movement is a way that these conversations are beginning to take place with certain companies. Anybody who's not familiar with this, I'd encourage you to Google B Corp or Benefit Corp and learn a little bit about it. There's couple thousand companies around the world right now that have passed this accreditation, and B Corp really is that triple bottom line thinking: people, planet, profits. And this is exactly what we're talking about. It's, yes, you have to run a profitable company, and yes, if you want to pay your people better, it's got to grow. And if you want to move into new markets, it's got to grow. But there are two other legs to that stool that can be considered as part of your, your, not your real paper P&L, but your more important P&L, your more important balance sheet, and that is, the people in your community, the people in your company, the people who produce your goods, and what the impact is on the environment.
We're getting some good comments from a listener, Mark Profit, and some of it I have to say I agree with, and some of it I don't. I wanted to circle back a second before, I know we got to wrap it up here, but I wanted to address these comments. First of all, we were talking about makerspaces earlier, and I referred to a they as if there was kind of an organized movement, but my experience with it is more involved with knowing the people here in Madison who have a pretty successful makerspace in Madison called Sector 67. And it's more of an educational outreach, but I do know that they're talking with other people who are doing similar things about developing standards. So while there might not be an overview of an organization that's doing this, it's happening organically as people go to standardize what they do, so that you can go into a makerspace and find certain things as you'd expect them to be, number one. And then, in terms of curriculum for as a learning tool, they're looking at standardizing that as well. So, as close as I can point you to the they, that would be Sector 67. But some of the comments from Mark, I don't know if we can riff on these a little bit, but the jobs not coming back, maybe the wrong phrase is what Michael has said in response to Mark, and then that was countered with how people spend their time when jobs are eliminated. We can all see the comment string there, but can we maybe go around and respond to this a bit, because I think it's fair given that we're getting the feedback.
Which part specifically, Brad? You just had two topics there.
I think I responded to the makerspace comment, but I mean, are the jobs coming back? Are they being different types of jobs, as was asserted? Is the whole premise of the idea of jobs coming back? Jeff, you said, in your original post, no, it's not valid because for political reasons. But I think long term, looking out on a 30 to 50 year horizons, I don't know, as a business case, not just an environmental case, but a business case, the jobs can't come back. I mean, we might get into a position where we can't ship goods, and we have to go back to making and sourcing them locally. So that's on a lot of people's minds, and that's my opinion of it. But that's I guess I've addressed them both. But if anyone has anything to add,
first off, Mark, thank you. Your posts are good. We appreciate you participating in this way. And I think, for me, if I were to qualify which types of jobs we're talking about, I would be able to agree, yes, they're not coming back, or they may. Somebody else posted something else about 3D printers, and to what extent could that make it more likely that there'd be more manufacturing in the United States? And I would, I'm not a technology guy, but I would have to say probably, yes, probably. But again, you go back to which ones were lost, and which jobs were lost, and which jobs could come back. So that, if a 3D printer can make something, and it takes, I don't know, I'll just make up numbers. I have no idea about this at all. Half a dozen people to run the machinery to do that. That it used to take 150 people to do it manually. Yes, you can say some jobs came back, but the ratio between the ones that were lost and the ones that came back is extreme. And And Daniel, you talked about this earlier about, you know, the automation aspect of this.
Well, yeah, and further to that point, I think, you know, kind of tying in what Kristen said earlier, I think that you will have, I think also it's a good distinction between coming back and creating here. I think you will have demand for jobs here as you get more and more products that people want, either be it quicker or more technically made or whatever the case may be. And Brad, what you were talking about before with some of the bike companies and things like that, where there is a demand for products to be made here. I think there's going to be a large distinction between, let's say, specialty products and mass market products. I think that there will be a market for specialty products to be made here. And I think that, I don't know, again, you know, that's why I think the term coming back is not accurate, but there will be jobs for people that have, you know, specific skills and can make special things that you just wouldn't get either the same product if it was made overseas, or you wouldn't get it as fast, or you wouldn't get it specifically meeting the consumer needs that are here for those specialty products. But I think as it relates to mass market products, which, you know, let's face it, we're kind of in an industry that's maybe becoming more mass market, but isn't really now mass market, right? I mean, when you talk about the Walmarts and the Targets and on the apparel side, like the Uniqlos and Gaps and Old Navys and things like that, those types of products I don't see landing here, you know, or I don't see being made here. I don't see those jobs coming back in any sense or being created here. But as it relates to some of those specialty products, I think you will see more and more of that. And, you know, just on as it relates to my business, I think that as you get into, let's say on the bedding side of our company, some of the higher end down comforters and things like that, yeah, there'll be room for those to be made here. And especially as you know, maybe we offer more customizable options for people to make a heavier down blanket, lighter down blanket, pick your fill power, whatever the case may be. For those types of specialty products and for the consumers that want that, yeah, they'll be able to buy that here. But for your average, you know, blanket that you want to be able to walk into Target and buy for $39.99, you know, I don't ever see a way that those are going to come back here.
You know, and to that point, Daniel, and you and I have had this conversation, and I know you and 200 other people have had this conversation, as I have. Factory people in Asia. Let's just focus on China, since that seems to be kind of a target of some of these conversations. Factory owners in China and sourcing people from here who represent U.S. brands are indeed having vigorous conversations about let's move the jobs out of China. But we're not talking about moving them back here. We're talking about moving them to Cambodia.
To places where it's even cheaper.
Yeah. Myanmar or Bangladesh or some of those venues. And those conversations have been going on for, you know, 5 years anyway, if not longer, because we can all see what that trend is. And maybe we're close to out of time, but if I could just toss in a couple of things that were in the piece, but just as an educational point, so people know this. A couple of the claims that are made about, again, let's say Chinese factories, is that they're quote unquote sweatshops, and that, you know, wages are depressed in order to beat the United States because we always lose. The whole sweatshop notion is, by and large, a thing of the past. Now, I'm sure there still are non-compliant factories out and about, and I've been into hundreds and hundreds of factories, as has Daniel. These days, the social and the safety compliance in factories is very robust, very active, and Walmart doesn't get a lot of kudos for too many things, but when it comes to this, Walmart has really led the world in having really strict, very robust social and safety compliance programs that they don't fool around with. If you break their rules a couple times in a row, you know, it's 3 strikes, you're out. And the other one is the notion that China and let's say Vietnam and some other venues are keeping wages low in order to beat the United States manufacturing. Absolutely not true. Both Vietnam and China, for for a handful of years that I've been tracking it, their minimum wages have gone up every year, double digits, to the point where the compounded minimum wage increase in both China and Vietnam, and I don't have numbers in front of me, but it's roughly right, over the last 5 years has been about 50%. Bangladesh alone last year, I put it in, I think it was in the piece, raised their minimum wage 60% in 1 year. Americans would be thrilled at that kind of minimum wage increase here. So they're not winning because they're running sweatshops, and they're not winning because they're oppressing the people in terms of wages. It's just the math of the whole thing.
Thanks for bringing that up. And again, I want to keep an eye on time. Everybody spent a lot of time here with us today. I'd like to just wrap up by just stating a couple of takeaways. And first, I want to just say we will be filing a post to newnormalconsulting.com. So keep your eyes out for that on the blog there. Same place you found Jeff's post. But I loved your point, Daniel, early on around, looking at the conversation this way, like what can be made here? What can we make here? That's the key takeaway, I think, that every brand could, if this is something that's important to their consumer base, they can ask those types of questions and start to take the steps toward that. And I love what you said, Jeff, around what is the real cost and how do we convey that to customers? That's another really key actionable, topic that I think we might be able to flesh out into some actual tools that people can use in specialty. And then, Brad, I really love how you, really hit on that maker's space and customization and maker's movement, as well as the perception of why they buy. I mean, I think that you highlighted a couple of companies that are doing a lot right, and their consumers expect them to make products here. So what can we learn from those consumers in terms of what they expect and where our target consumers are, and how do we maybe get them there if that's where we want them to go? Again, the consumer's driving today, and things are more transparent than ever. That's really, I think, one of the most important things. And again, I think it's one of the things that tipped Jeff to write this is the politicians are, doing this self-aggrandizing overview, on reshoring. It's become a political topic, but really it's about what's important to our consumers in the outdoor active lifestyle markets. And really every brand can look at it through the lens of what their brand means to their consumers. And I also think maybe we can ask OIA to help educate retailers on this topic, because of the politics right now, they are going to get more questions around this. And we want them to feel confident in how they're selling our goods and our brands. So that's something else that we might be able to pull away from this as an actionable strategy. But really, the big point to me, the big takeaway, the same jobs are not going to come back. Why would they? There have been cultural shifts, and Michael Hodgson, thank you for all your support. There's some great stuff in the chat around a Newsweek article, but essentially the jobs aren't coming back because things are changing, and that means new jobs and new opportunities are there for all of us. I hate to sound Pollyanna, but we have to respond to these cultural trends, and we have to think about things the way our consumers are looking, not the way we've always done them. So I think that there's a lot of great strategy there. So. Does anyone else want to say anything to wrap up before we close for the day? And thank you again, everybody, for your time. This has been invaluable.
Yeah, thank you as well. A fun conversation, and I hope everybody who is watching or listening got something from this. That if nothing else, at least gives you pause to think about it.
Yep, for sure.
And special thanks to Daniel for joining us. He just flew back from China, and
Indeed.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
Yep, you brought so much to the conversation, Daniel. So thank you. And
Absolutely.
Keep your eye on that blog. Down at the bottom of the blog page, and also hopefully soon on the front page of newnormalconsulting.com, we'll have future blogs. And if you go into our Blab channel, you'll be able to watch the replay and share this with colleagues. And we just want to try and take the conversation out of the water cooler room and make it more part of like how we can make actionable success happen at our companies. We don't want to be reactive. We want to have everybody control their new normal as much as they can. So thank you again, and we will be connecting with you guys again really soon here. Have a great day.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.